While designing the battleships for the 1911 building year, Germany had seriously considered upgunning the ships to keep up with foreign counterparts, as by the time these ships were laid down, which would become the König class, it was confirmed that the Royal Navy, United States Navy, and Imperial Japanese Navy had all gone to 13.5 or 14-inch weapons. The Germans investigated placing a 32-centimeter piece aboard the Königs. However, this was rejected on the basis of the fact that the ships had a constrictive size, so they would lose 2 barrels, and it would increase the cost of the ship's construction, as this weapon was not yet in production, and it never was produced. In 1912, a new naval amendment was due, and in this amendment, the Navy was asking for nearly 350 million marks to increase the amount of capital ships being produced by 33%. So, over a 6-year period, Germany would incorporate 60 capital ships, with 2/3 of these being battleships and 1/3 being battlecruisers. However, Chancellor Hollweg and his cabinet would prevent this amendment from being incorporated in the 1912 budget, and they would reduce the budget to 250 million marks, and it would be incorporated in 1913, so the amount of capital ships constructed would be reduced. Since the funding for the new battleships would not be available until 1913, so the Germans were going to skip 1912, there was time to look into new gun designs. In August of 1912, Tirpitz asked for 3 calibers to be investigated: 35-centimeter pieces, 38-centimeter pieces, and 40-centimeter pieces. At this time, Krupp would inform Tirpitz that based on the wire-round system that the British were using, they would not be able to produce a gun larger than 40 centimeters, and this would draw Tirpitz's interest. In reality, Krupp had made an incorrect assumption, as the British would end up producing an 18-inch weapon using the same production method as its predecessors. With Krupp's incorrect information at hand, Tirpitz would order 2 designs to be produced, one mounting the 35-centimeter guns, and the other the 40-centimeter guns. In September of 1911, 2 designs were approved. The first one was effectively the König, except it was slightly larger and mounted 35-centimeter guns, while the other was a heavily improved design that incorporated 8 40-centimeter guns in 4 dual turrets in 2 superfiring pairs, with 1 pair forward and 1 pair aft. During this time in the designing phase, the Germans had also investigated installing triple turrets on the new class. These were rejected on several grounds. The amount of ammunition stored per barrel would be decreased in comparison to a dual turret. The rate of fire would be decreased due to the increased amount of components working within the turret. The dispersion of the shells would be decreased, as blast pressure would interfere with other barrels and shells. And finally, in the event a turret was knocked out, more guns were taken out of action in comparison to a dual turret. It was believed that dual turrets would give this ship a prolonged fighting capability. Now, when it comes to the 2 approved designs, there was a dilemma on which one was superior. One side of the spectrum believed that the increased amount of barrels for the 35-centimeter design meant that there was a 25% increase in the chance of striking an enemy warship, whereas on the other side of the spectrum, the 40-centimeter shells upon striking a ship would theoretically do more damage. Tirpitz would step in and end the argument for both sides, as he had received numbers. The 35-centimeter design would have a standard displacement of about 29,000 tons, and it would cost 59 million marks to construct, whereas the 40-centimeter design would have a standard displacement of about 28,500 tons, and it would cost 60 million marks to construct. Compare this to the 45 million marks of the König class, and both of these designs were way too expensive. This cost was not helped by the fact that only 250 million marks had been approved for the initial request of 350 million. As a result, a third design would be made up, which would incorporate a ship of roughly 28,000 tons, armed with 8 38-centimeter guns, with an overall cost of 57 million marks to construct, and this design would be approved for further development on the 26th of September, 1911. One of the earliest points for the new 38-centimeter design to be considered was increasing the armor in comparison to the König, since König did not have an increase when compared to the Kaiser. As a result, a few locations saw increases. The casemates would go from 170 millimeters to 200 millimeters. The upper belt would go from 200 millimeters to 250 millimeters, and the torpedo bulkhead would go from 40 millimeters to 50 millimeters. As for the ship's armor deck, there would actually be decreases in comparison to the König. On the Königs, the horizontal section was 60 millimeters. On the new class, they would be 30 millimeters, while the turtleback on the Königs was 100 millimeters. On the new class, they would only be 80. As had been done while designing the preceding classes of battleships, Germany had assumed that the average fighting range would quickly decrease to about medium to short distance, and this meant that plunging fire was not considered a real threat. The armored deck really existed to prevent shells from entering the citadel in the event the main belt was penetrated, which in this case, it was a 350mm belt, so that was going to be a difficult task. Moving on to machinery, Tirpitz once again had his mind set on diesels. However, the question did not go through the extensive process that it had in the preceding classes. It was quickly decided that the diesel would once again not be available, and so these ships were designed only with the intention of installing a full set of steam turbines. Ever since the development of Prinz Regent Luitpold, the last of the Kaiser-class battleships, this was the quickest this question had been settled. The ships would also have 11 coal-fed boilers and 3 oil-fed boilers. All in all, the ships would be capable of producing 55,000 shaft horsepower, giving them a top speed of 21 knots, which was considered adequate at the time. With the design having been finalized and funding approved for 1913, 2 ships would be laid down that year. Hull number 590 would be laid down at Hallwaldswerke in Kiel on the 22nd of December, 1913, and Hull 913 would be laid down at Zickau Danzig on the 20th of December, 1913. Even though this ship's keel was laid 2 days prior, the other ship would be considered the lead of class. Once the first 2 ships were laid down, the statistics for the Royal Navy's Queen Elizabeth-class battleships became available, and the Germans had to face the reality that they were capable of running at upwards of 25 knots. Since the last 2 ships of the new class had yet to be laid down, the Germans revised the design and ended up creating a subclass. The central shaft would now incorporate a diesel engine instead of a steam turbine, and the ship's overall length would be increased by 2.4 meters. All in all, the final 2 ships of the class would have an increased standard displacement of 200 tons greater than that of the first 2, and they would have an increased speed estimated at 22.5 knots. As a result, the third ship, Hull 210, would be laid down at Germania Werft in Kiel on the 15th of April, 1914, and the final ship, Hull number 19, would be laid down at AG Vulcan in Hamburg on the 4th of January, 1915. Hull 590 was launched on the 18th of February, 1915, and completed on the 18th of March, 1916, being commissioned on the 15th of July, 1916, as SMS Bayern. Hull 913 would be launched on the 30th of October, 1915, completed on the 19th of October, 1916, and commissioned on the 14th of March, 1917, as SMS Baden. Hull number 210 would be launched on the 21st of November, 1916, and construction would slow, so it was never completed or commissioned. However, it was named Sachsen. Hull number 19 was launched on the 20th of June, 1917, and its construction was effectively suspended from there on out. It was never completed. However, it was named Württemberg. Bayern and Baden were the largest and statistically most powerful battleships Imperial Germany would commission into its navy. Outside of sailing and fleet exercises and a couple fleet advances, which resulted in Bayern striking a mine 1 time, these ships did nothing. These were impressive units that would have most definitely had an interesting impact on the battlefield. However, they never got the chance. With that having been said, there is nothing more to add on to this topic for today. So, if you have learned something new in this video, why not leave a like and a comment down below, and have a wonderful day.